Okay. Where do I get the signal to?
Please take your seats. The meeting is about to begin. Please stand by. We are going on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning and welcome to our Finance and Economic Resiliency Committee meeting. We're going to have our second rendition of the budget workshop. Thank you for being here, Commissioner Vice Mayor Dominguez, Commissioner Bott, and the chair of our committee, Joe Magazine. I understand we have Commissioner Fernandez and Commissioner Rosen Gonzalez on the line as well. And take it away, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. As the mayor said, welcome to our June budget workshop retreat. We have with us our city manager, our CFO, our finance team, and the mayor and commission. So while this is a meeting of the Finance Economic Resiliency Committee, this will be kind of an all hands on deck effort as we kick off and continue going through our budget season. So I'll hand it over whoever would like to kick things off, whether it be the city manager or CFO. I'll leave that to both of your discretions.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here this morning as a follow-up to our May 20th budget retreat, where we received a lot of feedback from the Commission. Today reflects a pivotal moment in the budget preparation process, as we will discuss the preliminary operating budget and give updates. Since the retreat, we'll also discuss the millage rate and our capital budget on a preliminary basis. I do want to highlight our finance and budget team represented here today by Jason Green and Tamika Otto-Stewart and their respective departments that work very hard to develop this budget. And we have staff ready and available here to answer any additional questions that may come throughout the discussion today. So without any further ado, I'll kick it over to Jason and Tamika. Thank you.
Good morning. PJ, you could bring up the presentation. All right, so good morning, everyone. What we wanted to do first is to give an update from the budget retreat. We spent a lot of time back in May talking about the operating budget and the what's coming up with the values as of June 1st. Next slide. So when we met back in May, we had needed a 2.7% increase in our property values in order to have a balanced current service level budget. On June 1st, the property values actually came in at 8.8% increase. So good news on our side, good news overall for the county. I just wanted to temper this 8.8% increase with a little note that of our increase or existing property values increased by 8.3%. Our new construction was 0.5 of that total increase of 8.8, as compared to Miami-Dade County, which new construction grew at 1.4%. So we're trending a little behind Miami-Dade County in overall new construction, which is on this slide here. Right, so next slide. So again, when we met on May 20th, we had a $6.5 million budget gap. We needed $2.7 million to balance the budget. Next slide. And based on the 8.8 property value increase, we are actually at a surplus of 14.4. So we close the gap, and then we actually have some surplus. It is important to note, though, that this does not include any enhancements and any potential increases to the budget from our union negotiations, which are underway right now.
So I'm going to speak a little bit about our millage rates and a couple of policy recommendations we're hoping to get some feedback from, and we hope we'll get some positive on that. So our initial preliminary 2025 millage rates look like this. It's flat across the board on the operating millage, but the voted debt service, which is tied to our general obligation debt that we issued in 2019 and 2023, because we have primarily kind of a flat debt structure, approximate, because we had that increase in taxable value of our properties, we actually need less millage to cover that existing debt service. So there's a small decrease that is required on the voted debt service, but we have a policy recommendation related to that. So I'm going to pause on the slide for a little bit as I go through this. So the first thing I want to mention, as we mention often, is we have a $1.2 billion in unfunded capital needs over the next 5 years for our capital program. Just looking at 2025, even with the existing funding that we have coming in, we're looking at a $5.3 million deficit in our capital rural replacement, or CRR, which is funded with its own separate millage, and $22.1 million unfunded in our PAYGO, which is also covered with a separate millage. So the first of our recommendations is the dedicated CR millage adjustment. And our recommendation is that slight decrease in the voted debt service millage be transferred up into the CRR millage. This would generate an extra $1.3 million in funding for the capital renewal replacement program. Quite honestly, over the long term, this will be more than likely my recommendation anytime this happens, in which there's a decrease in that voted debt service to continue to enhance the level of funding towards our capital program. And I know as we spoke privately, in briefings and such, I think this goes to the pledge that I looked at that the city made to the residents back in 2018. In 2018, I wasn't your CFO. I was just a resident of South Beach. And I heard about this $450 million capital GO bond, and I knew this was kind of in my area of expertise, so I got out of my condo and I said, let me find out more about this. And I attended several public information sessions at the Jewish Museum in South of Fifth and at the New World Symphony. I got to know and meet with several senior staff, elected officials, and I spoke to them about it, and including some concerns I had that in that funding were dollars set aside for things that I would look normally would be done through the normal course of action of a municipal government, such as making sure our sidewalks are fixed, our asphalt is resurfaced, and things along those lines. And I was told that time the general plan was that this GO bond program would get us up to speed to get everything fixed to where it should be over the next 10 years or so, but the city would do its best to dedicate additional financial resources so that when that GO bond program is over and it's time that the city's own funds other than the GO bond would have to start fixing what I look at as the basics of municipal infrastructure, your streets and your sidewalks and your sign panels and things along those lines. What can we? I realized that I would be the one having to fulfill the promise that was made to myself, but this goes towards that, and along the with the second one there is what can we do to incrementally adjust upward the dollars the city puts towards capital programs. And hopefully this is one that we will get positive traction for. I did want to mention also that these were both presented to the Budget Advisory Committee, and they were, I believe that went out as an LTC to you, and that came back with a unanimous recommendation to endorse the administration's recommendations here. The second one is general fund interest income for capital projects. The recommendation is to allocate a new financial policy, which we would take to commission as part of this budget document, to be endorsed hopefully with the September budget, to start allocating 25% of the city's interest income in the general fund. This would be approximately $2 million that would be additional dedicated to go to the PAYGO. This represents approximately the amount of increase that we're projecting between the 2024 $6 million budget and the $8 million projected income for 2025. The reason I'm recommending this, not only because we need it in the capital program, is that as your CFO, going through and examining the city's finances, I'm trying to see things from my perspective that makes the city more financially resilient. And interest income is an area that has actually been very volatile. Interest income was only about $1 million a year a few years ago when interest rates were close to zero. We've had a run up and it's been great. We've generated significant interest income. But just as it was great that it ran up, it could run back down. And if we're in a situation during a recession, the Federal Reserve will often, actually will always, lower interest rates to spur economic activity. And if we're in that kind of situation, and I look at that as a when, not if, it will happen, it's just I don't know when, let's be prepared for that. So the recommendation is we would start at 25%, and then every year thereafter we would increase it by 5%. So at some distant future, in 10, 15 years or so, we would get to 100% allocated to capital projects, putting more dollars to work in the capital project and taking a volatile revenue source out. We don't want to be tying recurring salaries for people to something that all of a sudden I have a $7 million budget deficit that was of no one's fault of its own just because interest rates took a dive. And we have to be in a situation to cut back service levels. So while we're in a time when we have a good surplus, let's start making these, I think, good decisions, hopefully. So actually, I'm going to pause here quickly if there's any kind of questions, comments on this. These are our two major policy statements that we're hoping to get some feedback on, and then we'll continue on with the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. CFO. Thank you, Jason. Agree with you. We need to move in the direction of fiscal responsibility and prudence. If I could ask two questions. One, if you could give a quick overview, without going line item by line item, of the $1.2 billion unfunded capital projects. Is there chunky items? Is it, if you could give some sort of generalization, if there's a few large items, where is this unfunded needs coming from? And I agree with you that we need to be fiscally responsible and start preparing for this. However, this is, and I agree with your approach and methodology, and I'm going to be supportive of this, but really, this is just a rounding error, right? Putting a couple $1 million of interest expense towards a $1.2 billion unfunded surplus. So above and beyond shuffling around a few $1 million per year, where can we start making a dent in that $1.2 billion? Where is that money ultimately going to come from? Because, when we talk about $5 million, perhaps max $5 million of interest income expense now being shifted towards going towards this $1.2 billion surplus, that's not making a dent in trying to get to that unfunded gap. So how do we, above and beyond this, start approaching that?
Thank you. It's a very good question. A majority of this is going to be in our enterprise funds and our GO bonds. So a lot of that is going to be funded by future debt service. And it's going to be your water and sewer and your stormwater are going to be big components of that. They are paid based on user fees and through issuance of debt to do those major long-term generational capital projects. We still have several $100 million in general obligation bonds that a future commission will hopefully approve for us to actually issue the debt to do that in our program, but it's programmed, and until it's approved by commission to issue the debt, it's considered unfunded from that perspective. We have a number of other enterprise funds, whether it's our convention center or our parking. They have its own fee structure that should be able to cover a lot of that. When you're looking at a smaller subsect, which is your CRR and your PAYGO, those are more in the tens or maybe $100 million kind of range. So though it may seem smaller amounts, technically the $1.3 million increase in the CRR is actually a 50% increase in what the city is currently dedicated. And my thought is over a longer time, maybe getting up to a $10 million a year CRR might be in a good course.
I appreciate that. That's actually incredibly helpful. Would it make sense to essentially allocate this interest income towards unfunded capital surplus X what is covered by enterprise funds?
Yeah, so that's why the recommendation on the millage is for it to go to the CRR, or capital and replacement. That's going to be mostly, you'll see that when we get to the capital budget, mostly 40 recertifications, keeping our existing assets fixed. You're going to see HVAC, you're going to see roofs, you're going to see windows, things along those lines. The PAYGO is the more analogous thing. It could be more open up. That's going to be new replacements on playground equipment and things like that. But what will happen, what I'm looking at is in the future, is what happens in 10, 15 years when it's time to start budgeting a couple $1 million a year for asphalt or a couple $1 million a year for sidewalks, because they're not going to be tens of millions a year. They'll be in the millions per year, I believe. At that time, we want to make sure that we slowly beef up. And I think it's an incremental approach. I don't think we have to be revolutionary at this point. I think we need to be evolutionary, but the decisions we make today do weigh in the scales of tomorrow.
Please, Commissioner Bott, Mayor Minor. Commissioner Bott.
Thank you. So two questions, and I'm not trying to poke holes in what's happened over the past years, but it seems like a lot of this, a lot of the projects that we talked about in the briefing were delayed maintenance of our own city facilities. I've heard it be said a number of times that, we take care of the public-facing stuff first and deal with our stuff last, which I appreciate, but also, would the cost be as high if we were kind of fixing things as they came up rather than waiting until the last possible minute? And is this I know you haven't been here for 20 years, so you don't necessarily have the historical perspective, but how do we avoid getting ourselves into this situation going forward? Like, it seems like a lot of the money that we need to find now is to play catch up on things that, had we dealt with them sooner, might not have been, and not all of them, but might not have been as expensive. That's the first question. The second question, totally unrelated. And I don't mean to give you a pop quiz, but do we have a sense of when the convention center hotel comes online, how much that is going to help offset some of the funds that we're going to need to do things going forward, between increasing the type and scale of conventions that are booked and revenues coming in from the hotel itself?
Okay, let me try and tackle that one question at a time. The first question was related to, when we put together our capital program, there are, and you will see, there are unfunded, unmet needs that are in our capital program this year. We do look at the dollars that are available. We get the priorities from the individual departments. The budget department blends those different priorities together, and then we begin to allocate dollars that are available, starting at the most restricted dollars to the most open, such as the PAYGO. At the end of the day, there are unfunded needs in our CRR and PAYGO. Those are the primary sources of unmet needs in our 2025 capital budget. When we put that together, that is sent back out to departments so that they're able to look at it and see, did we miss the mark? Is there anything in there that is going to critical needs? And we're going to go through the list of priorities when we get to the capital budget, so you may be repeating some of what Tamika is going to speak to later. But we look at what are critical needs, what are public safety from a perspective of the assets, leaking roofs, mold issues, things along those lines that could impact the preservation of the asset and people's and staff's ability to enjoy the asset. Some are nicer to have if they were, that they should get done, but they don't necessarily have to. We sent those out to departments. 4 projects did come back asking that they weren't initially recommended for funding, but they really thought they were important for various reasons. And I won't go into the details of those projects, but there were a couple that they said they needed to do. We did relook at it, and actually we were discussing these new recommendations, policy recommendations. And us moving forward, we freed up another $3.3 million we were able to fund those 4 projects as an example. So I believe that the departments have looked at that list and they are comfortable that the projects that we are requesting funding for are sufficient to meet their needs. Would it be nice to do a number of the other projects? You'll see a lot of $100,000 to $500,000 CR projects. Yes, but they are not necessarily need to be done. And I often joke about like the bathrooms in the finance department. You know, it would be nice to renovate the 40 or 50-year-old bathrooms, but they're functional, they're clean, they're not unsafe. We can get by, as it were. But I think making these steps today to increase those dollars incrementally over the years will help to address that. I think.
If I may, I guess what I was getting at is, why are we finding ourselves in this situation this year? Did it just not get prioritized in years past? The sort of
It was
inside
always
the family kind of.
Yeah, it was always about available funding. And if you look back over the history of the years of what the millage that was dedicated towards those, and I think the commission a number of years ago actually cut it during a recession or such, just because, I don't know, that was just the purview of the commission at the time. There's almost always never going to be a situation where we probably have every dollar to do everything you want to do. But we feel that we are hitting the mark and what is absolutely required. Would we absolutely, if the commission said, fund every one of those and let's increase the millage for CRR and the PAYGO? Yes, that would be wonderful. But I also understand it's probably not reasonable to expect that. So we are trying to find mechanisms and pathways to increase those dollars in, I think, a palatable way.
Okay.
And then your other question on the convention center hotel, I believe there will be more of an update that in July, and I don't necessarily want to speak to that now. Okay.
Yeah, I would just add to that. Back in 2019, we actually only had one dedicated millage rate for capital, and that was a capital renewal and replacement. In 2019, we added a millage rate for PAYGO. So we have tried to start addressing it because we have a millage rate. As the property values increase, that revenue has been also increasing. So we have been trying to make it work without doing significant increases to the millage rate. Back to the presentation.
Yeah, no, there's other questions, we'll move on. Okay.
If we could, one second, I think, Mr. Mayor, did you want to chime in?
Let's continue, and then I'll hold my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. So if we follow these policy recommendations, this is what the new general fund would look like. So that would take that to approximately $2 million of interest income out from the surplus, which would leave a remaining $12.6 million surplus available for various appropriations. And just to reinforce what Tamika had said, that this does not include any adjustments related to the new union contract, so this doesn't include any cost of living for any of the employees, doesn't include any of the enhancements requested by the elected officials through their priority resolutions or through the administration. And then this is what the millage would look like. It's just a swap. So the commission still would be voting on a flat total combined millage rate, but it gives us a little bit more, actually 50% more, basically, in the capital renewal and replacement.
So just a quick update on the resort tax budget, and the update is that there is no update. Next slide. So this is a slide we showed at the May retreat, and it basically shows that our resort tax budget is balanced. It actually is balanced with a decline of $4.6 million from last year's budget, or I should say this year's budget. So our resort tax revenues, as you will see, have been going lower than what we budgeted this year, and last year's actual, they're trending at about 5% lower than last year. So we're hoping we're just at a new low, and we've adjusted a resort tax transfer to the general fund in order to make this budget balanced. So as we go through the operating budget, when we get to the June FERC meeting, the July FERC meetings, we will not be recommending any enhancements because the budget is balanced. So we'll pause here because this is the end of the operating update. If anyone has any more questions or comments.
I did, yes. I want to be forward-thinking, and I think this is one of the probably more important things that I'm going to ask today. Things look great here for this year, but if we can fast forward 1 year, the city has been benefactors of 2 years of double-digit property value increases, and this year, close to double digits. That is not a realistic run rate to expect to continue. On top of that, we have several, I believe 5 union contracts coming up. If you could just give some back-of-the-envelope projections of, I'm not even saying if we would agree to where the unions are coming in at. If we would just have have you run any projections of if our budget essentially is at a run rate and we agree to, 2% increase, 1% increase for compensation benefits for our unions, what does our essentially surplus look like next year? Right now, where we have $14 million surplus, if we would essentially keep things flat, but add in a modest increase for the union contracts being renegotiated, where are we at next year?
I don't want to get into details, but I will give you this. If we look at the COLA, which would be something that would go across the board as it impacts the general fund. If we were at a 3% COLA that was in April 1st, which was per the last contract, but I know historically has been October 1st after, I think, 2 contracts prior, and there's been some discussion about pushing that back. But if we were at October, approximately $3 million would be the general fund impact at April 1st. So we were at 14.6. We talked about 2 million for the capital, leave 12.6. $3 million would just be a 3% COLA in April. There's been requests for higher numbers than that.
That's per month? Right.
No, per year. 3 million for the year would be the general fund impact for the one hitting in April. There's been requests that are higher in the 4% range. There's the requests that have been to start in October. And I think October at 4% was almost $7 million. So just to give that as an example, there's a request for 4% in October, and that's close to $7 million. That's just that alone. That doesn't include anything else related to shifts or steps or anything along those lines. So just to get an idea, it would be helpful, I think, to have as much of that available to ensure that we're able to get those 5 contracts across the finish line.
Yep. And just for all of us to remember, that's not some one-time impact fee. That's essentially an incremental addition every year to the budget. So thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're going to get into the capital budget, which is the meat of today. Okay.
So this is just a little overview of the capital plan. So we do a 5-year CIP capital improvement plan, and this is the official policy statement for the city's capital expenditures. It does show a 5-year plan. What we focus on in today's meeting and when we adopt the budget in September is a FY25 next year's plan. So a quick timeline of our budget process. So we started the budget process in December. So in December, our departments were asked to start working on their requests for 25. They were submitted to the budget office in January. And between February and June, we have had close to 60 meetings between the departments, with the city manager, with the executive team, reviewing both the operating and the capital budget. And we have come up with recommendations. All our recommendations have been shared with every department, and we've gotten feedback. As Jason said, we had a few departments ask us to try to prioritize some projects, and we have those included in the recommendation that you'll see today. So the purpose of our FERC meetings here, where we've invited all the commissioners, is to have you give us your feedback earlier on in the budget process between now and July. In August, what we're going to do is take your recommendation, build them into our budget. We'll prepare a proposed budget book that you'll have when you come back from recess, and then we'll have 2 public hearings in September to adopt the final budget. So this goes on to a question that Commissioner Butt asked. This is just for FY25, but just an overview of what our unfunded needs look like. Of a total request of $105 million for FY25 only, we are recommending funding $73 million. And that leaves an unfunded amount of about $32 million in all funds. What we're going to focus on primarily are the capital renewal replacement funds, the quality of life, and the pay-as-you-go funds. Those fund a lot of our general fund / resort tax type assets. So you may be wondering what's the basis of the allocations that we're recommending. The first priority is what are our high priority projects? So we work with the departments to prioritize the projects when they come to us, and we try to fund as many high need projects. And Jason will show as we go through the slides, we have a lot of required 40-year recertifications that we have to get done. And so we use our CRR and PAYGO dollars for those first. Then we have capital projects that have funding gaps. So before we add funding for new projects, we try to fund our existing projects. And then we allocate matching funds as much as possible for projects that have a grant. And then we allocate funding for our other funds, parking, transportation, for example. These are all special revenue or enterprise funds, and they have their own funding source. When we go through the presentation, you'll see that they are pretty much able to take care of their needs, and we have recommended almost every project in those categories.
So what we have here is just a list of our capital funding strategies. Number 2 and number 3 we spoke to a little bit earlier on the operating side of the update. The first one is just a mention related to the golf courses. Traditionally, golf courses are part of a city's general fund. They are not money makers. They're traditionally, subsidized by the overall general fund. It kind of happened during COVID and during, our inflationary increase period where rates were able to be increased. And we've found over the past year or so that our golf courses are now generating a surplus within their cost center in the general fund. There is an approximate $9 million golf course renovation project at the Miami Beach golf course. The commission approved a $1 million allocation last year for design, planning, and permitting. The rest $8 million for the construction. What our recommendation is that the surplus generated in 2024 on the golf course call center would just be able to be kept by the golf course to renovate to use for their own capital project. We think that's a smart way to move forward because again, they have obviously capital and so capital replacement needs, and they're able to just, the dollars they're generating, they get to keep and spend for it. So this $2.4 million can go towards that $8 million they need, and we'll look at this, funding this over multiple years so they can get that project to completion.
Jason, could we just put that as a policy going forward until that entire capital need is exhausted? So in the coming years, anytime that the golf course runs a surplus, the first dollars of that surplus will essentially go towards that $8 million?
We can include that as part of the policy statement, as part of the budget document. Obviously, anything, can't tie to a future commission, but it does help so that if you do that, then that would just kind of be the baseline. We wouldn't have to call it out on an annual basis. And then based on the funding, it looks like it'll take 2, 3, 4 years probably to get that all done, but that sounds like a good idea. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Jason, are there other things, circumstances like this that we could sort of make this policy decision to apply so that it becomes kind of a baseline for any, not just specifically the golf course, but any need that is unfunded that generates its own funds gets applied to that need?
I don't believe so. We will go back and double check because that's why we have special revenue funds and enterprise funds where those assets are set aside specifically. And the question would be, we want to do that with the golf course, but we just never know how the future is going to go. I think this is probably the primary asset where you would have this kind of thing, but I will have the budget office take a look with the departments to see if there's anything is, and if there is, we'll report back.
Thank you.
Thank you. So here is a list, it was requested, and as we always present, a list of where are the priorities that the commission has approved. So here's a list of the priority capital projects. As you know, capital projects are the domain of the FERC. They get referred down to FERC to be discussed, and they may or may not come back with a positive recommendation. This is a list of around $10 million in capital projects. They are all in the capital program. Though the ones with check marks were ones that we did specifically identify funding for and are recommending funding for those. And all of those primarily did go through FERC and to commission or will be approved as a recommended budget priority at the June commission meeting. I just really want to highlight the main one at the top, the biggest dollar one. the pedestrianly compacted sand path east of Dunes. On that one, there is a companion to that in the operating side, $100,000 for a feasibility study. We know that that may be a heavy lift to get that approved from a regulatory perspective. So the administration's recommendation is, though the project will stay in our capital program, we would push that out a year, and we will make the administration's recommendation on the operating side that we fund the $100,000 for the feasibility analysis instead of tying up $4 million in a capital project that we're not 100% sure whether would be needed. So we do that, and then the feasibility study will happen, and probably 1 year from now we would probably have that discussion on whether we want to move forward on it. So that's the main one I wanted to point out on this slide here.
So now we're going to actually go into the list of projects. So you're going to see several slides that show the projects that we're recommending. This just mentions that within your agenda, there's a large document in the middle that has a list of projects. We're calling it Attachment A. It lists every single project that was requested over the 5 years, and then it shows what we're recommending. So what we're going to go through is what we are recommending. If there are any projects that are on the list that are not recommended that you'd like to give us feedback for, this would be a great opportunity. So we'll first go through the capital renewal replacement list. So as was mentioned a couple of times now, the CRR, it has a dedicated millage. So as the property values increase, so do the revenues. And everything that you see here includes we're expecting or, assuming that you all will accept our recommendation of that millage rate transfer to the CRR. If that's accepted, there's $1.3 million included in the recommendations here that you'll see in the next slides. This slide just basically shows what was a total request and what was unfunded. So we recommended 3.9 of all the requests. There was a total of 7.9 requested. So even after funding almost 4 million, there's still an unfunded need of 4 million.
So I'll show here, the next two slides show the list of recommended projects to be funded with our available capital replacement funds. You're going to see a theme there.
Geez, I'm sorry. Before we get into that, I think Commissioner Fernandez wanted to chime in. I know he was the lead on the packed path. Mr. City Attorney, are we able to recognize Commissioner Fernandez?
I don't know if that's accurate, that last part.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I mean,
I know he
just
had
semantics.
No,
but-
sorry. I know he had interest in that, so perhaps that's why I wanted to interject there. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, we call him Commissioner Fernandez.
Are you able to recognize him on Zoom?
PJ needs to do that.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner Fernandez.
Can you hear me?
We hear you loud
Good
and
morning.
clear.
Good morning. Yes, great. Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, you are right. You have been the longtime lead on the compact sand, and certainly 100% support your efforts to get the funding so we can start the regulatory process on that. So thank you. But I actually had my hand raised because I noticed that we had the Lincoln Road street end railings. 10th Street, 14th Street, fronting the bay as funding for the next fiscal year as one of the recommended projects. And I think that's important. I just want to make sure that doesn't preclude us from starting on those projects this year. Is that correct?
Yes, the $150,000 for the Lincoln Road street end railings, 10th and 14th Street, that is part of the 25 budget process. So those dollars will become available to be, from an expenditure perspective, October 1st.
Got it. And thank you for that answer. And one of the other points I just wanted to ask for on the record, since I've been elected, I've been trying to prioritize projects to improve water quality around Parkview Island, given the recurring elevated level of nutrients that we have in that area. And I know this year we have a line item budget being recommended for fiscal year 25 once again. Is that all the funding that the department needs for this year, or is this a partial funding for Parkview Island?
Commissioner, that was a full funding request. That was the $2 million requested by the department, and we're recommending fully funding that request.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to put these items into the record.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Fernandez.
PJ, if we put the presentation back up. Perfect. So this is the first of two slides on the capital rural replacement. You're going to see a theme there, and that's 40 and a 90-year recertification. So those are the milestone ones for all of us that live in condominium buildings. We're very familiar with this process, where many of us are going through this, and the city also has to do this. This is about safeguarding the assets that we already own and ensuring that they are safe and stable going forward. So this continues funding all of our 40 recertifications. The one, again, main call out there would be, our continuing funding towards the 90-year recertification for the historic City Hall, and that's a multi-year, I think it's a $1 million allocation over a couple of years as they, go through major renovations for that project.
Please, Commissioner Bob.
Thank you. The Smith & Walensky recertification, is that a cost shared with the business that occupies that space?
No, I don't believe so. It is the building is a city asset. The city leases it to that tenant who pays rent.
Okay.
And then here the second set of items that are recommended through the capital road replacement. Again, these are not the out front in your face items that residents are going to walk down the street and see, but they are important. Again, whether they're door replacement, refrigeration equipment, HVAC renewal, things along those lines. These are the kind of the more mundane things, but these are the things that we need to move forward with. So this is about $3.9 million allocated towards the capital replacement program.
So now we're going to jump into the pay-as-you-go funding. This is also a dedicated millage rate, as was previously described. It actually generates $4.8 million in revenues based on the property values. Next slide. Right, so it generates 4.8, but we did have funding from prior years. So you may recall last year when we ended FY23, we had $16 million of surplus that we transferred some of that over to PAYGO funding. So we had some leftover funds, and then the recommended $2.3 million transfer from the golf courses, it's here as well as the $2 million from the interest income is built in. So we were able to fund $16.4 million of projects from this fund. There's still $20 million unfunded.
So I'll just do this first one. This is a series of slides on our PAYGO. And the reason I'm just going to mention here is the very first 4 projects in here, a little less than $1 million of that PAYGO is actually CRR projects that CRR ran out of money. And we transferred them over here to PAYGO. PAYGO has the most, least restrictions on its usage. So again, we have 40 recertifications towards those buildings. And then we have just a number of other kind of, as Commissioner Bob was saying, kind of behind the scenes things that are more going to be seen from the employee side, whether it's, a fire alarm, electric charging stations, an awning for a fireboat. But then as we move into the next, you'll be able to see something a little different.
Yeah, so well, this slide actually continues the behind-the-scene improvements. For example, smart card access or actual facilities to make our buildings more secure. City Hall main entrance pavers, some restroom renovations. So we're actually trying to do some internal behind-the-scene items here. Next slide. And the next 3 slides get into more of the forward-facing assets that the residents will enjoy. One of the main projects we have here is almost $1 million for the Flamingo Park playground replacement. We also have $648,000 at Scott Rico for the ring refrigeration, which is necessary to keep that facility going. We also have the Belle Isle Dog Park artificial turf. So right now there is actual sod, and they're going to convert that to turf and add some irrigation systems. And the last one you see there is a golf course that we're recommending transferring their surplus to.
I just wanted to go back because I forget to mention a couple of ones that I know that were commission priorities and who they were, and I may miss a few. So bear with me, but the last one on this list, the $500,000 towards the master plan development and design work for the Miami Beach drive improvements was touted by Commissioner Fernandez and moved through committee, and I believe it was recommended or is in the process of being recommended as a priority at the commission level. The Venetian Causeway entrance sign was another one that was a commission priority. We did find the funding available for that one. And then on here, as Tamika mentioned, the Belle Dog Park, I know Commissioner Dominguez championed that, and that was also voted on to be a commission priority.
So I'm a little bit surprised that a feasibility, maybe it's because it's a different scope of work, so please educate me. To do a feasibility study of the compacted sand east of the dunes is $100,000, which seems like it's a pretty major undertaking to do just the study of it. The project to reimagine Miami Beach Drive is 5 times the cost of that, which to me seems a lot less of a complicated thing to do. So could you educate me on that? I want them both to be funded. I'm not saying one's more important than the other, but it seems like there's a lot more work involved in one than there is in the other, and the funding seems lopsided.
Let me try to address that, Commissioner. The $100,000 towards the feasibility study for the compacted stand, I believe, and someone will run up and tug at my jacket if I'm off a little bit on this, is something that's going to be more between the consultant and the state regulatory agencies. It probably will not have a very much in the way of public involvement, because it's just about, is this technically feasible from a regulatory perspective, which is a little more straightforward professional service. The other one is not a feasibility, but it's a master plan. And talking with the department there, it was until they really scope it out and get with the consultant on it to get a more refined number, it was just, we think it should be somewhere in this line. When you do master plans that involve numerous public involvement meetings, and we know in our city we do that a good bit, that can drag out the price. So that $500,000 will probably not be exact number, but that was just the blanket number that was requested.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. And just one last one here is, again, Commissioner Fernandez mentioned earlier, the first one on here is another commission priority, which I believe is also Commissioner Fernandez, which was the Lincoln Road street end railings.
Yeah, so this list just continues with a lot of our city facilities. I'll just mention the citywide bridges. This is an annual funding that we try to fund to make sure our bridges are safe. We added funding for citywide pickleball and paddle courts, and then North Shore Park Youth Center baseball scorecard. So again, several forward-facing projects. And this is the last slide. We're adding actually a new dog park at 35th Street and more security enhancements citywide towards this campus and all the other campuses within our portfolio.
And just the highlight in here is the $500,000 towards the over-the-water Indian Creek pedestrian pathway. Where that, I believe, includes both the feasibility analysis and the actual design and permitting work. And the $2 million towards which, the over-the-water pedestrian pathway, I believe, was also Commissioner Fernandez's priority that is going to commission for endorsement, I think, in June. And the waterway marker and signs, I believe, was Commissioner Suarez had advocated for this project. This was an existing project that was already in our capital program, and we were able to identify fundings for that. So now we'll speak to another funding source for capital projects, which is our resort tax quality of life funds. Those come in equally, North Beach, South Beach, and Mid Beach. Historically, South Beach has more needs than the dollars are available, where Mid Beach and North Beach usually don't expend every single one of their dollars, which is nice in the sense that it does get to fund everything that they can in those resort tax eligible areas. So here in South Beach is a list of the projects that we're recommending for funding. You're seeing lifeguard stands, you're seeing the 10th Street Auditorium, restroom, roof replacement on 14th Street, Ocean Rescue, and a number of projects at South Point Park. And then the first one I mentioned, because you're going to see it in all three areas of the city, is an ongoing multi-year project for beach walk bollards all along throughout the city, and this continues that funding. This wraps up the South Beach. As you can see, it's a total of $2 million being recommended, allocating every dollar available. And again, this just continues with some more South Point Park lighting project, which I know is one that I've heard about that was of interest, and Bass Museum window replacements as an example. And then here we have Mid-Beach. Mid-Beach is $1.5 million worth of projects that were requested. We're able to fund every one of those projects. Approximately $850,000 remains, which is good news for two perspectives. One, if any of those projects goes over budget, we know that there's the dollars available to fund those change orders or those scope changes. And two, the dollars are available for next year. So when there's another big project coming along, we know there's excess dollars there. And again, along here, you're seeing the bollards again. You're seeing Mid-Beach right-of-way landscape areas, which is going to be in your resort tax eligible area, lifeguard stands along those lines. And then North Beach, I think, has two slides. You're going to again see the beach walk bollards. There's a number of projects that we're recommending at the band shell, whether they're roof repairs, electrical improvements, the tennis center up there, the Shane Rowing Center. And same here, more Shane Rowing Center, some landscaping, and alleyway restoration there. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. I forgot one last point. $2.3 million being recommended funding towards these projects. That'll leave $2 million unallocated. So again, that makes it available for resort tax eligible area, especially for these projects if they need to have additional scope or have change orders towards them.
So now we'll go into the parking funds, and again, they have their own dedicated fund sources. Several garages, you're going to see 4 slides, and these are primarily renewal and replacement of their existing assets. There are no new parking facilities being added this year to the budget. And if we'll go through the slides, at the end, you'll see there's a total of $10.5 million in renewal and replacement that's being recommended. So the parking fund is doing well. Post-COVID, they're projected to have over $6 million in surpluses this year. But we want to keep in mind that they have a lot of assets that they have to maintain. So we want to keep an eye on making sure their fund balance is solid.
We'll speak a little bit about transportation-related projects. So there's approximately $6 million recommended there that we are recommending funding for. These include a number of bike lanes, traffic calming, pedestrian zones, shared use paths, things along those lines. So we're hoping to get, I think we hit the mark on getting these projects funded. And now resiliency projects. Resiliency is going to be primarily your water, sewer, stormwater. I spoke a little bit about that earlier when Commissioner Magazine was asking about, our ongoing program. The commission approved in May an $85 million declaration of intent to issue. We will come in July with a budget amendment to appropriate those $85 million. There's a very large pump station, I want to say 28, that is out for procurement that might be in the $30+ million range that will go towards that. And that's why you're not really seeing much in the way of water and sewer, because technically the 25 work program is part of that issuance, so we're going to deal with it through the budget amendment. We just have here stormwater. We have some existing bond dollars, really unallocated dollars, whether through interest income, and we're recommending these projects. This goes towards that critical needs program that the commission approved recently. And here's just a few more, including some projects that were closed out and made more dollars available. Now, what Tamika is going to go through here is other funds. We have numerous other funds with small pieces, and she's going to go through those.
Yeah, so this is the last set of slides that we'll go through, and this just lists. We have hundreds of funds, and we mainly talk about the general fund and the PAYGO and the CRR, but we have several other funds. So what we do at the end of each year's audit is that we look at the available balances that are sitting in these funds, and what we try to do is appropriate them to all the projects to make sure every penny is spent and allocated each year. So again, this is a long, I think it's about 4 slides that we'll go through, more 40-year certifications, the unit ad building elevator upgrade, a lot of projects at City Hall. We're trying to, again, take care of our own internal assets. And the list continues. So we are funding, using up funds from old RDA bonds. The convention center actually has a dedicated funding source for their own renewal and replacement. So we are funding as many projects as are needed within the convention center as well. And again, so if you look at the slide, we have GO bond dollars from 1999. And the reason we have these funds is that we have projects that have appropriations that are not all spent. So while the dollars sit to be spent, they're earning interest. And if a project is also closed, it falls back to the fund balance. So what we're doing is, it's small amounts, but we're scooping them up and allocating them to projects that have needs right now. And again, the list goes on. More convention center projects, total of 22 million. And yeah, final slide. I'm going to let Jason talk about the first one, but the rest are primarily our internal service departments. They also have some 40-year certification and replacement of our vehicles, equipment, and some roofs.
So the last project I just want to highlight, just for everyone's attention, is the commonly known as the Betsy Perez home that was purchased by the building department. I know there was various discussions of that, but we still have it, being purchased by the building department at the $6.5 million. There is going to be extensive work that's needed to be done. There'll be some structural work with the foundation and electrical. To anything for its municipal use, there's going to be a major cost to that. And we knew that, and that's okay. The building department has surplus funds that are available to renovate, design that project. So we're requesting, $1 million through the building fund to begin that process, to design and to renovate that into a municipal institutional use. And that is the end of that part. And then I'll let Tamika speak about the budget process and where we'll wrap up.
Thanks. So the second FERC meeting will be on July 12th. We have a placeholder for the 19th, but on the 12th, what we plan to do is to go over our recommendations on the operating. So today we just did a brief update. We'll go into the operating in detail. If there are any recommendations that come from today's meeting on the Capitol, we will incorporate and give an update. If everything that we discussed today is final, then there really would be no update on Capitol. And again, we'll hold the 19th as a placeholder. We haven't had a third meeting in a couple of years, but if we do need to have the third meeting, we could, to just finalize both the operating and the capital budgets. On July 24th, we'll set the maximum millage rate. That is a regular commission meeting. And then during the recess, we'll be actually preparing the operating and capital budget books so that when you come back and you're ready to adopt the budget in September, we have 2 public hearings. You'll have all the information to review prior to those votes. And then our new fiscal year starts again on October 1st, and the process starts over.
And that's where we end it.
Commissioner Bott, and then Mr. City Attorney, if you could recognize after Commissioner Bott, the commissioner that's on the line.
Sure.
So how do we deal with projects that we don't know their status yet? Where we might need some additional funding for next year and for next year's budget, but we don't know what the status of that project is. Specifically, the possibility of moving the fire station from the site where it's contemplated to the edge of Flamingo Park.
It's a difficult question. If it ends up that we have to come up with $20 million, and I believe the roundabout would be basically a new $15 million project, a parks project to renovate and shift the stadium at Flamingo Park, and then another $5 million to be added to the fire station itself. And I believe that's the roundabout numbers of that. We do have a capital reserve fund, which does have some funds available that would be eligible more than likely for the fire station component. The $15 million for a brand new project for the stadium renovation, there are no dollars that are identified at this time.
So my understanding is that not all of those funds would be required for 2025. So we wouldn't be looking at finding $15 million for next year magically.
You would probably need some design money to design that project. So we would have to identify how much that money is. One area that could be made available, and I believe that, we'll have our answer in August and then September, is part of the general fund surplus that stands at $12.6 million right now. There's many needs, for that may seem like a larger number, but there are many needs, whether it's the union contracts or other enhancements. This will be a commission policy decision, but that is another, currently, untapped source that could be utilized. I don't know what the design cost would be, probably in the $1-2 million range, I would suspect, but I'm literally just off the top of my head.
So can I make a request, please, that between now and the next meeting, we have those costs identified and laid out as to what would hit the budget next year versus years going forward, so that we can make an informed decision. I don't want what could be an excellent policy decision to be cut down because of inaccurate numbers, especially when it leaves the chambers and starts getting bandied about by residents, and the fear mongering of, we need $20 million next year that we don't have. That's not an accurate representation. So I want it to be on the record, loud and clear, how much it's going to be next year, and then for years going forward, and how much of it is could be funded already versus whatever the issues are. I would like them to be laid out, because that is a huge project, and I don't see it anywhere. So if we could add that in, that would be great.
Sure, we will look into that and get back on what the estimated design costs would be for the brand new park project.
If I could just add, Jason, the fire station item has been on the commission agenda for a couple meetings, and to the extent that we're able to do a rough estimate and have any information available for the commission meeting, if and when the item is called, we would provide that before the next budget briefing.
So the item on the commission is an update of all the locations. It's almost an obsolete item now, because we're down to 2 locations, right? The one that it was designed for, and the one on the western edge of Flamingo Park. So given that that's the case, it's either going to be one or the other. So I don't think it's too heavy a lift to figure out the costs that would be incumbent on the or attached to the project to move it to the Flamingo Park site, so that we can just factor it in. If it's $5 million next year, it's a very different thing than people thinking that it's $20 million next year all of a sudden. So that's the conversation to be had. And I can't even remember. I think I had asked that commission item to be pulled off of the agenda anyhow, because it's obsolete in its entirety, because we only have the 2 sites left. So.
And I think that we could isolate the discussion to the 2 sites if the commission
Okay.
would allow for that.
Okay, that's fine.
And just a heads up, I do plan on calling it at the commission meeting on Wednesday. We had been spending a lot of time on this item month after month, so the last couple of months I wanted to let it consolidate, get to the point where we can make a decision. So I will be calling it next Wednesday.
Mr. Chair, we have Commissioner Suarez on the line. PJ, if you could please allow him to speak.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Just a quick question. Jason, you said that it's $1 million in design fees for the old Betsy Perez house? Is that
No,
correct?
I'm sorry, good Commissioner. To answer the question, of is $1 million for the design? No, it's $1 million for the overall project. That would involve design, permitting, and construction. Until we really get into what the design and permitting would look like, we would then update the construction cost. But we thought, let's allocate $1 million for now to get that going, and that may be sufficient to do both the design and the construction.
Thank you.
There are any other
That's it.
questions? Oh, thank you, Commissioner.
Any other comments? Rick, anybody on the line?
No commissioners, no further commissioners.
Yeah, and Jason, are there other projects similar to fire station that have cost overruns, right? So when we talk about things, especially that were perhaps allocated in the geo bonds, for instance, Byron Carlisle Theater comes to mind. We won't even get into the 72nd Street garage and things like that. But for some of these large, the Fillmore, right, where we dedicated in 2021, 2022, a certain amount because of inflation or for other reasons, cost delays, these projects are going to come in at perhaps materially higher price tags when they are eventually executed. Where does that money come from? Is that the same money that we need to essentially find each year to essentially be able to top up those projects?
Yes, and you'll see that during the year when you have budget amendments. One of the sources is the capital reserve fund, which is by commission policy, the year-end surplus in the general fund is transferred into that, and that helps to fund ongoing projects that are in the construction phase, so that when we have an estimate of the project being 20 million, and then the bids come in and it's $24 million. Where do you get the $4 million from? It could come theoretically from that if the commission so chose. It could also come from, the basis of a project that's already ongoing. And that's really the primary reason for the capital reserve. Is a project is already in construction and you get a change order because of, let's say, an unforeseen condition in the ground or something along those lines, it would be funded along those lines. So there is a fund to cover the expenditures for ongoing projects that need additional dollars. Now, projects that are still in the imagining phase or in the design phase, those are going to come from your pay-go dollars. That they may, hopefully, they're in an enterprise fund that would be able to have, additional debt dollars to help cover those things. But those that are funded traditionally through your pay-go sources, that is one of the the difficult things to find those dollars.
And if I could ask, in addition to Commissioner Boss' request for our next budget meeting, if we could have an overview of some of those projects that perhaps are in the design phase and could be facing cost overruns, because we're going to have a lot of competing interests for somewhat limited and finite amount of money, and we can't be looking at things on a year-by-year basis. We have to plan, multiple years in the future. So I just want the full menu of things where if we say, okay, we're going to go this path, it is going to come at the expense of perhaps some other things. So at least so we can have a full picture of some of these projects and, perhaps material funding gaps.
If I may, I think that's a good idea, and what we can do there is we will work with the departments on projects that are going to be primarily funded through a pay-go source, which is one of the, like I said, the most unrestricted ones. So we'll try to identify the projects where there are unknowns, in the sense that we have a project, this is a budget, and we suspect that there will be a budget gap, but we just don't have it yet, so it's not in our numbers. And they can highlight a few of those, and we can have a slide or two kind of listing out ones that we are putting on the radar that may end up having funding gaps in the next year or two or so. Thank you.
Please, Mr. City Attorney, if we have comments from the public.
We have a couple members from the public. PJ, please let Mr. Mitch Novick speak.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Mitch Novick. I'm a 36-year resident, and my company will be celebrating its 35th year in business in a couple of weeks. When I hear that resort tax revenue is declining, when I'm reminded we have 800 new hotel units being built now at the convention center, and when I hear utility billing rates will be rising again, I get nervous. I will say our budget has doubled over the past dozen years. We have 500 more employees in that time. We also have had way over a dozen utility billing rate increases in the last dozen years. I would ask you to focus, keep your eye on the money. Jason made a good presentation. I just have a couple of inquiries. $400,000 for police roll-up garage doors. I don't know if that's a typo. Maybe it should be 40,000 or a little more. 800,000 for AC replacement at historic City Hall, and then another 500,000 for AC renewal at historic City Hall. I don't know what renewal means in this context. I would just urge you to proceed with caution. And again, Jason made a nice presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Novick. Could we please allow Mr. Roberts to speak?
Thank you very much. I also want to commend Jason. He's a resident. He lives south of Fifth. He has a family, and he's extremely professional and nice to people. And I respect him immensely. And Raquel has done an extraordinary job, considering that she was thrown into the role rather quickly. So thank you for your efforts, both of you. I do have issues. And the biggest issue, I think Mitch talked about a dozen years, but over the last 2 years, our budgets, including sewer, has increased from approximately 700 million to 1 billion. That's a 40% increase in 2 years. That's, triple the inflation rate in that period of time. And I'm concerned that that rise will continue in future years, and it will impact the city substantially when the downturn happens, because ad valorem rates will have to go up, and sewer rates are just going through the roof, and residents can't afford that. It affects renters, it affects homeowners, it affects the hotels. We're gonna face the day where we're gonna be in a serious problem, and I would hope that from a 10,000-foot perspective, rather than getting into the weeds, that we limit growth in budgets to overall the 1 billion to CPI plus whatever additional new construction value there is, 1 or 2% a year, so that we keep our budgets within the $2024 going forward after inflation. And it really concerns me how spending is done. And the last thing I want to talk about is, yes, Mitch brought up $400,000 doors. We talked about the cameras at the convention center. First thing.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. We also have Jeffrey Burkow.
Thank you, Commissioners. Jeff Burkow, 590 Lakeview Drive. I'm here today representing the Nautilus area, Orchard Park, and Lakeview Homeowners Associations. In 2014 and 15, we negotiated a covenant with the developers of the property that was then known as the Miami Heart Institute and is now known as the Ritz-Carlton Residences, a condominium. The developer proffered a covenant to the City Commission and the homeowner associations at the time of project approval in order to accommodate the new residential development. The Commission accepted this covenant, and the covenant became part of the zoning conditions governing the project. And they include numerous issues, including limiting the number of docks at the project to 24, but the ability to go up to 41 if certain conditions were met, such as securing a regular law enforcement patrol of Surprise Lake 4 times a day on weekends and holidays. And the thought was, developer, you get 24 docks as a matter of right. If you want to exceed that number, then help us mitigate the impact of the additional docks and the traffic on the lake. We recently learned that the developer had exceeded the limits of the covenant. The city hadn't enforced it, and they built 36 docks without complying with the covenant conditions. Since then, we've been in discussions with the city administration, the Ritz-Carlton and condo representatives, and police department staff to see how we could collectively secure the regular marine patrol that was required by the covenant. The police department has told us that they don't currently have the resources on a regular or overtime basis to provide the patrol. So the three homeowner associations are here today to ask you to budget funds for additional marine patrol and a boat which will service the entire city and also provide the regular patrol required by the covenant accepted by the city as part of the project approval. The Ritz-Carlton representatives have told us they are agreeable in concept to paying their fair share of that funding. We recognize that you have a lot of competing projects and needs, but we ask you to help us on this proposal and this request so we don't have to initiate proceedings with the city manager to ask that those permits for the excess slips be revoked.
Thank you, Mr. Burkow.
Thank you.
Mr. Burkow, thank you.
Yes.
Because this is the first time this is coming onto
Right.
my radar. So it was the Ritz-Carlton that essentially, they had a bilateral agreement with the homeowners association, or this was through the city?
This was through the city and the homeowner associations. The city and the homeowner associations are the beneficiaries of the covenant and can enforce the covenant. It was part of the project approval when the project was rezoned and the comp plan was amended in 2015.
So essentially, the developer exceeded what was agreed
Correct.
to.
That
And
is
now
correct.
that is straining our city resources because incremental resources are needed to essentially respond to residents' concerns because of the incremental commercial even spaces that
Well,
were.
it's not really commercial. There's 12 more slips that are utilized by the residents. They're owned by individual residents. We don't want to impact those residents who bought their slips thinking they had good title to them. But quite frankly, the developer screwed up, the city screwed up in allowing them to build 36 slips, and the Ritz and the condo associations screwed up, and the homeowners associations are bearing the impacts, and it needs to be mitigated. And we're trying to work this out without going into litigation and asking for permit revocation proceedings.
And the developer that you mentioned screwed up, that was the Ritz-Carlton?
It was Lionheart that was the developer. They were the developer, and they entered into management agreements with the Ritz-Carlton that still manages the agreement, and then they condominiumized the property, and now it's controlled by the condo association.
Madam City Manager?
Thank you so much. So it is my understanding that staff has been in various discussions, including our police department, I think our planning department as well, and some of our enforcement departments. I have not yet been briefed on the status of these discussions and would be happy to provide an update to the Mayor and City Commission as to what the findings have been and what course of action we would recommend. So happy to continue the discussion, and if deemed necessary, we would include on the enhancement request through the budget process, should we need additional services.
Yeah, please.
May I ask a
Yeah, please, Commissioner.
Forgive me for being dumb about this, but if a developer overstepped his bounds and is responsible for the security, for all intents and purposes, that he agreed to, why is it not incumbent on the developer to fund that enhanced security?
That's an excellent question. The developer is out of the picture. We're talking to the people who now own and can control and manage the 36 slips. They may need to turn around and make a claim against the developer. I'm just not, I don't know ultimately whose responsibility it is. We're just trying to fix the situation now.
Because it seems like somebody in honest mistake or knowingly overbuilt, took their money and left, and now we're asking residents to use their tax dollars to provide enhanced security for private property, which doesn't seem to, I don't know, maybe that's how things happen normally. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. If there needs to be enhanced security, then it would seem like the condominium could provide that as part of their condo fees. I'm not sure, this is not my lane, but this just seems wildly weird to me.
So let me just tell you what I've heard informally from the administration is that for the first year, the additional marine patrol and a boat would cost approximately $500,000. Subsequent years, it would cost approximately $400,000 in round numbers because there's no more need for an additional boat, and that the fair share attributable to the condo association or Ritz or the developer for the 4 times a day for weekends and holidays would be 22.5% of the total, approximately. But that's informal, and I'm trying to get that in writing from the administration.
I mean, 4 times a day in a very quiet area seems like a lot. I mean, I live overlooking the water. I'm very lucky to do that, and I directly over the water, and I
Right.
see a fire boat go out once in a blue moon, but I don't see people patrolling the marina at my condo 4 times a
Well,
day.
you're right, and during the week, it is very quiet. During the weekend, what we see are the commercial traffic from the jet ski operators and the tour boat operators, et cetera, that go through Surprise Lake from the intracoastal to Biscayne Bay and back. So there's a significantly more traffic on weekends and holidays. During the week, we don't need it.
So when, Madam City Manager, when you work with the staff to present an update, you know, from a holistic standpoint, I know we could use an additional boat patrolling all of our waterways. It seems like this is very specific, and I just want to understand how that works in the context of our entire city and what the other boats do, like what the ratio is of time spent in particular neighborhoods of our existing boats.
And Commissioner, it's not necessarily that would be the recommendation. I do want to have an opportunity to evaluate and assess the facts. And if the administration felt it was warranted, then we would bring that forward in some shape or form and provide the additional details. But I'm not saying that would be the recommendation.
I'm also really curious, I mean, it's not like they overbuilt by one dock. It's, what were the numbers?
50%, by 50%.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty major thing
I agree.
for a code compliance, not a building person who's signing off on a project to miss. So I'm really curious as to how we find ourselves in this situation. And I know it was done years ago before when was it completed?
I would say it was completed 4 or 5 years ago.
So before most of us, or all of us, were in charge, if you will. Not that any of us are actually in charge, but we like to maintain that illusion. But I mean, that's a huge, I mean, it's like, oops, we just added an extra story to our building.
Through the chair, if I may, the covenant actually allows to go up to 41, but there were certain conditions, as Mr. Burkow said earlier. So they were allowed 24 without those conditions, and then they could go up as high as 41 with specific conditions, which Mr. Burkow has brought up here.
Right, but they haven't satisfied the conditions.
Correct.
They built, but they didn't satisfy the conditions.
They
So
subsequently installed the required signage after we discovered the issue and pointed it out. We've been working collaboratively with them since then to try to get additional marine patrol, whether on a regular or overtime basis. The police department has been clear they don't currently have the resources, so that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Burkow. I mean, even more troubling when you mention the developer is now out of the picture, because we want to help the residents in these neighborhoods. There's such a strong fabric of our community, but it's very tough to go and say, well, a developer essentially took advantage of our entire community, and now that cost is being borne by some of our residents in North Beach or South Beach, when he is essentially, kind of cut and run. So, Madam City Manager, if we can get an update, and we look to help the community, but hopefully it's not at the expense of our taxpayers.
Certainly, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mayor, can I hand the reins over to you?
Yes, unless there's anything else, first of all, I wanted to
Thank you.
thank Commissioner Magazine for your leadership in as the chair of the Finance and Budget Committee. You're doing a great job, so I appreciate you leading us through. And Jason and Tamika, not just at these meetings, and Jason's pointing at Tamika, giving her the credit, which shows you what a great teamwork that you both have. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and there really is not much more important. We talk about public safety and the quality of life, but this is where it happens, having the fiscal responsibility, the stewardship of our taxpayers' funding, and the trust that they have. And we have a smart resident base. They follow, they know, and very much appreciate the work that's put in by our whole commission and the administration to get us to this point, and hopefully we'll soon be finalizing the budget as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the commission. I think we have the feedback and interest that we need to move forward. We will be meeting again on July 12th to kind of go through this again with the July 1st final numbers update on the operating budget, and then going through all of the enhancements from the operating side. And I think you asked for a couple of data points, and we will make sure to have those a couple slides in that presentation also. But if nothing else, I think we are good.
Ron, thank you for all the staff's work that's going into this.
Thank you.